My name is Claire McKenna, and I used to believe that family meant protection. Until the day my daughter was dying, and my mother laughed. It began like any other Tuesday. The sky was clear, the air was crisp, and my to-do list was normal groceries, pick up Ava from school, ballet class at 4, then dinner. It was a routine we'd perfected, one of the few stable things in our lives. Ava, 8 years old, was the center of my universe. After years of infertility, miscarriages, and heartbreak, she had arrived like a miracle. My sunshine, my heartbeat, my reason for every breath. But none of that mattered when a speeding delivery van ran a red light. The impact was sudden and deafening. Metal crumpling, glass shattering, my car spinning like a top. I don't remember screaming. I just remember Ava's small hand slipping from mine. When I came to, everything was blurred sirens, people shouting, the sickening smell of gasoline and blood. My own blood. Her blood. I fought against the paramedics to stay close to her. I remember clutching her hand as they wheeled her into the trauma bay, whispering, "Stay with me, baby. Mommy's right here." Her eyes were closed. Her body, so small, looked broken in ways no child ever should. Fractured spine, the ER doctor said grimly, several broken ribs, collapsed lung. "We're doing everything we can." I nodded, numb, clutching the only thing I could, her favorite purple ballot bag that had landed beside me on the pavement. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just sat in that sterile waiting room, blood drying on my jeans, waiting for someone to tell me my daughter was alive. And when they did, when they said, "She's stable. For now," I crumbled. I stayed by Ava's side for 12 hours straight. I did not eat. I did not blink, unless I had to. I just watched the slow rhythm of the monitor, the rise and fall of her chest with the help of machines. I counted each beep like it was the last one I would hear. When the nurse gently placed a warm blanket over my shoulders, I barely noticed. My body was there, my heart was somewhere deep in that bed, tangled in wires and IV tubes. Then my phone buzzed. I checked the screen. Mum. For a split second I felt relief. Maybe she had heard. Maybe she was worried. Maybe she was coming to be with me. I answered. Her voice was sharp. Not panicked. Not shaken. Annoyed. "So," she said. Like she was calling about the weather. "Are you finished being dramatic now?" I blinked. Confused. "What?" "This little accident of Ava's is making the family look unstable. Your brother has a critical investor meeting this week, Claire, and this is a distraction." My heart stopped. I had nearly lost my daughter. And all my mother could think about was a pitch meeting for my brother. "She's in ICU," I said quietly. "And your brother is presenting to a billionaire," she snapped. "You need to get your head straight. We can't afford to let emotions ruin Daniel's chance." Daniel. Of course. It was always Daniel. I gripped the edge of Ava's hospital bed. She almost died. My mother paused for a second, not out of sympathy, but calculation. "Well," she said, her voice turning cold, "let's not pretend she was going to do anything important with her life. She's fragile, just like you." There was a long silence. Then she delivered the sentence I would never forget. "Honestly, Claire, if she doesn't make it, maybe it's for the best. Focus on someone who actually has a future." I said nothing. I couldn't. And that silence, that moment of stunned heartbreak, was apparently permission for her to keep going. "You're too emotional. This is why you've always been a liability. Daniel is the future of this family. Do not ruin this for him." I ended the call. I sat there, staring at the black screen in my hand, and for the first time in years, I did not cry. Not when she called Ava a burden. Not when she dismissed my love as hysteria. No, something in me shifted. Not sadness, not even rage. Something deeper. Steel. Resolve. The kind that wakes up when you finally see people for who they truly are, and I saw them now. My mother, my father, my brother, not as family, but as threats. The next morning, I returned to Ava's hospital room holding 2 cups of coffee. One for myself and one for the night nurse who had been so kind. I hadn't slept more than 20 minutes in the last 36 hours. But Ava had opened her eyes, even if just briefly. She had recognized my voice, she had squeezed my hand. And that was all I needed to keep going. I was adjusting her blanket when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, and froze. My parents stood in the doorway, side by side, dressed impeccably as if arriving at a brunch, not a hospital room. My mother wore a pale pink blazer and heels. My father had on his usual navy blue sports coat and that polished, empty smile he reserved for public events. In my arms, Ava stirred slightly, and I instinctively stepped between them and her bed. "Claire," my father said with mock concern, "we just wanted to check in. See how she was doing." My mother carried a tray of bakery cookies and a helium balloon that read "Get well soon" in cheerful, mocking colors. "I hope this cheers her up," she said sweetly, setting the tray down on the side table. Then, she leaned forward to look at Ava's small body tangled in tubes and bruises. Her face hardened. "What a shame," she murmured under her breath. "Such a pretty face. Wasted." My hands clenched into fists at my sides. Then, almost casually, she turned to me and whispered, "You shouldn't get too attached. It's still touch and go, right? And your brother really needs you tonight. He's still got that second round with the investors." I did not blink. I did not flinch, but I pressed record on my phone inside my pocket. The nurse walked in just then, and suddenly my mother's entire tone shifted. Her voice turned sugary. "Oh, isn't she such a fighter?" she cooed. "We've all been praying for her." The nurse smiled politely. I did not. I was silent as stone. But inside, something had cracked, and something else had solidified. That night, I went to the front desk and handed them a piece of paper with 2 names. Underlined. My parents. "Do not allow these individuals into this unit," I told them firmly. Not even to look through the glass. They protested the next morning. My father tried to bribe the attending nurse. He even threatened to file a complaint against the hospital. But I had shown them the recording, and the staff rallied around me like an army. From that moment on, my parents were locked out of Ava's recovery, and my life. But I was not done yet. Not by a long shot. For the next 5 days, I barely moved from Ava's bedside. The doctors told me she was lucky to be alive, that most children with her injuries would never wake up, let alone speak. But Ava was trying. Her tiny fingers twitched against mine. She opened her eyes more often, and once, she even asked for her favorite stuffed giraffe. It gave me something to hold on to. But while we fought to keep Ava alive, the rest of my family treated her survival like an inconvenience. The first call came from my brother, Evan. He didn't ask how Ava was. He didn't ask how I was. Instead, he launched into his latest complaint. "You could have at least shown up for 5 minutes," he said. "We lost the investor?" Dad is livid. "And honestly, Claire, you're being selfish." I stared at the phone like it had grown teeth. "Selfish?" I repeated slowly. "She's stable now." Evan snapped. "What's the point of you sitting there? I needed you in that room. You know how important this pitch was." "She's 8, Evan. She almost died. And I'm 32. I just lost a $2.6 million deal." That was the last thing he said before hanging up. That night, I received an email from my father. Subject line, "Family first." The body of the email read, "Your behavior is becoming embarrassing. Family does not abandon family, especially not in front of investors. Your daughter's accident, though unfortunate, should not derail everyone else's life. We raised you better than this. Synod. Regards, Dad. Love. No, hope Ava is okay. Just corporate coldness." I didn't respond. Instead, I opened a second browser tab. I looked up trauma lawyers, pediatric mental health coordinators, child advocacy networks. While they poured their energy into saving Evan's future, I was building a fortress around Ava's. I was done being the soft one. By week 3, Ava was sitting up with help. Her back brace made her movements stiff, but her spirit had started to return. She asked me to read her favorite bedtime book, The Secret Garden, and when I cried during one of the chapters, she reached over and wiped my tears with her tiny hand. "It's okay, Mommy," she whispered. "You're brave." I kissed her hand and knew, right then, that something irreversible had changed in me. I would no longer protect the people who had hurt me just because we shared blood. I would no longer stay silent. I began collecting every voicemail, every screenshot, every email, the recordings from the hospital, the message from my father, the dismissive tone of my brother, the snide remarks that were whispered, thinking Ava could not hear. I put it all in a drive. And then I sent it to 5 places: the board of directors of my father's company, the wives of his golf club buddies, the CEO Evan had been trying to woo, a local investigative journalist, myself, so I could never back down. The subject line was simple: "This is what they call family values." Then I turned off my phone, and I waited. The silence didn't last long. The fallout began quietly, just a ripple at first. A few missed calls, then an email from my mother titled, "Call me now." I didn't. Because I already knew what was happening. I had spent my entire life shrinking, making room for my parents' cruelty, my brother's entitlement, their ambitions, their image. Every time I said nothing, they took more. A little more of my dignity. A little more of my voice. And I let them. Because I thought love was something you had to earn. But as I watched Ava fight for every breath, every smile, I realized love isn't earned by obedience, it's proven through presence. And they had never once shown up when it mattered. That morning, I moved Ava to a private pediatric recovery center near the coast. A clean, quiet place where the air smelled like salt and jasmine, and the halls didn't echo with forced politeness. It was paid for with a trust fund my grandmother had left me. The one my parents always claimed didn't really exist. I used it like a shield. For the first time in my life, I used something they didn't want me to have. I changed our phone number. I blocked every known contact. I handed over the security footage of my father harassing the hospital staff. I met with my lawyer and finalized the no-contact orders, and then I breathed, not all at once. Just in small pieces. Because even though I had drawn the line, the grief didn't disappear. It crept in through cracks I didn't know I had. I mourned the mother I once hoped to have. The father who used to lift me on his shoulders when I was 4. The brother I once adored. I didn't just lose family. I lost the illusion of family. And that's a different kind of heartbreak. One that breaks you from the inside, not from absence, but from betrayal. But Ava needed me whole, so I kept going. Then came the news. My father had been called into an emergency board meeting. Investors were pulling out. Evan's startup had lost its final funding stream. My mother's name had been quietly removed from 3 charity boards. She called from a blocked number. I didn't answer. Instead, I took Ava outside that afternoon and watched her laugh at a butterfly. That was my empire now. My daughter's joy. The courtroom smelled like old wood and dust. The kind of place that holds the weight of 1,000 whispered truths and 1,000,000 ignored lies. I sat beside my attorney, hands still, voice steady. But inside something roared. Not rage, not fear, something ancient. A voice that had been buried in me for decades, finally rising. Across the aisle my parents sat, my mother in pearls, her hands clasped too tightly in her lap, my father in his usual suit, a shade too expensive for a man who had just been exposed. Evan wasn't there. He had declined to testify. Typical. The judge looked over his glasses at me and said, "Ms. Harper, you may read your statement." I stood, and then, I told the truth. Not the polished version. Not the polite version. The real version. I am not here today because of an accident. I began, my voice echoing across the wooden panels. I am here because of everything that followed. I looked directly at my parents. You taught me that success mattered more than safety. That appearances were more important than empathy. That family means support, unless it costs you something. I paused, hearing the room go still. My daughter, Ava, is not a burden, she is not a mistake, she is not a distraction from your golden child's startup or a blemish on your public image. I took a breath. And when she lay in that hospital bed, fighting to stay alive, you laughed, you dismissed her, you treated her like something expendable. I handed the court clerk a small device. "May I?" The judge nodded, and I pressed play. My mother's voice filled the room, clear, cutting. "Let her die. Focus on your brother." Gasps, whispers. My father closed his eyes. My mother went pale. I let the silence sit like judgment. Then I finished. "My daughter is not disposable. And I am no longer your daughter." The judge didn't look surprised. He looked tired. Like he had seen too many of these stories, just with less evidence. The no-contact order was granted, permanently. My parents were barred from approaching me or Ava in any form. They left the courtroom in silence, and I walked out lighter than I had in years. It had been 7 weeks since the courtroom hearing. 7 weeks without surprise phone calls. 7 weeks without looking over my shoulder. 7 weeks of waking up without fear that someone would try to tell me my child's life wasn't valuable enough. I had moved Ava and myself to a quiet coastal town. 3 hours from the city, far from the glass towers and family legacies that once kept me locked in silence. Our new apartment overlooked a bluff with crashing waves below. The air smelled of salt and jasmine, and the mornings were quiet enough that I could hear my daughter breathe while she slept. Ava's recovery was slow, but it was happening. Her first steps after the accident came one breezy Tuesday. The physical therapist had wrapped her legs in braces, her hands gripping parallel bars. I stood just a few feet away, pretending not to hover. But of course, I was watching every breath, every movement. She grinned, that gap-toothed smile of hers making the whole room brighter. Then she lifted one foot. Then another. Tiny, wobbly steps. But steps? She laughed when she stumbled, and that laughter cracked something open in me, not the sharp grief I had been holding, but something warmer, something I had not felt in a long, long time. "Hope. Mummy," she said. I walked. Like a giraffe. "Yes, sweetheart," I whispered. "You did. But what I didn't tell her, what I couldn't say just yet, was that in that moment I was the one learning how to walk again too. Healing wasn't linear. Some nights, Ava would wake up from nightmares, not about the accident but about voices, cold ones, familiar ones. Why did they say I was a mistake? She asked once, wrapped in her strawberry-printed pajamas, her stuffed fox clutched tight. I didn't lie. Because some people don't understand how strong you are, I said. Do I have to be strong all the time? No, love. You just have to be real. Strong comes and goes. But real, that stays. She looked at me for a long moment then nodded. I like that. Me too. That conversation changed the way I spoke to her, and even more than that, it changed the way I spoke to myself. I no longer apologized for feeling, no longer shrunk myself so others could feel taller. And slowly, word of what had happened began to fade from the news cycle. My family's name, once polished and pristine, had been tarnished by their own hands. The investors pulled out. Daniel's startup went under. The mansion was quietly sold. The yacht auctioned off. Their friends stopped answering calls. I didn't watch it gleefully. But I also didn't feel sorry. Karma wasn't a storm. It was a mirror. And they had finally seen themselves in it. The quiet after the storm is where the deepest transformation takes place. In those silent days, I started to reclaim pieces of myself I had long forgotten, buried under years of gaslighting, guilt, and generational manipulation. For the first time in my adult life, I was not performing, not proving, not bevving, I was simply breathing. One morning, while Ava was at her therapy session drawing rainbows and giraffes with her physical therapist, I sat at the local cafe with my laptop open and an untouched cup of tea. I stared at the blinking cursor, the empty document, and something in me whispered, "Tell it." So I began writing. Not just the events, not just the facts, but the feelings. The numbness in the hospital, the way my mother's voice chilled my blood more than the car accident ever could, the suffocating weight of being the daughter who was always too much. Too sensitive, too emotional, too in the way. I poured it out. Every moment, every hidden bruise on my heart. And when I finished, I hit publish on a blog post titled, "The Day My Parents Laughed at My Dying Daughter." I did not expect anyone to read it. But they did. Within hours messages started coming in. Hundreds of them. Then thousands. From daughters. From sons who had also been told they were too fragile. Or too emotional to matter. It was not a story anymore. It was a movement. And I was no longer alone. By the end of that week, the post had been shared over 1 million times. Articles popped up. Podcasters reached out. One journalist called it the most haunting and necessary testimony of silent emotional abuse this year. But what struck me most wasn't the attention. It was the women, some in their 50s, 60s, even 70s, writing to say, "This happened to me too. I thought it was just my family. I thought I was crazy." That word, crazy, it had been used like a leash on women for generations. To silence them, to dismiss their truths. But now it was unraveling, and I was holding the scissors. The irony wasn't lost on me. Ava had taken to planting seeds in styrofoam cups by the windowsill. Each cup had a name. One was called Courage. One was Laugh Again. And the biggest one, the one she watered with extra care, was named Sunlight. Because sunlight makes things grow, right, Mommy? She asked one morning, muddy hands smudging her cheeks. Yes, baby, it does. That afternoon she gave me a drawing, our family, just the two of us, standing under a rainbow. A fox stood beside us, and behind us was a tree with a heart carved into the bark. Above it, she'd written in bright crayon letters, "Our life, just us, good now." I cried, but not out of sadness. She was healing, and somehow, so was I. It arrived on a Thursday morning, wrapped in cream-colored stationery with a gold seal that looked too delicate for what it carried. A letter, no return address. Just my name in careful, slanted handwriting that made my stomach tighten with old memories. I stared at it for a long time before I opened it. Inside was a single page, handwritten in blue ink. "Dear Claire, I do not expect forgiveness. I am not even sure I deserve your time." But I saw the blog, I read every word, twice, and for the first time in my life, I did not see a daughter who had disappointed me. I saw a woman who survived me. "I cannot undo what I said. I cannot erase how I made you feel. But I am starting to understand the cost. I am sorry." Mom, no flourish, no signature, no love. Mom, just Mom. And that word, sorry, sitting on the page like a stone dropped in still water. I folded the letter slowly. My hands were shaking, not because I forgave her, but because for the first time in 34 years, she had acknowledged the truth, even if it came far too late. I showed Ava the letter that evening. Not the words, but the envelope. "Who is it from?" she asked, sitting cross-legged on the couch with her sketchbook. Someone from the past, I said quietly. Someone who used to make me feel very small. She frowned. Do they still make you feel that way? I shook my head. No, sweetie, not anymore. Ava drew a small sunflower beside her crayon sketch of a cat. Then they don't get to come back, right? She said it with such childlike clarity that it made me smile. Right? They don't get to come back. We can forgive without reopening the door. We can heal without rebuilding the same house. So I folded the letter one more time, placed it gently into a wooden box marked past, and slid it to the back of the closet. Not as a keepsake, but as evidence. Evidence that even those who once tried to bury you may one day remember your name, not as something to control, but something they lost the right to hold. Ava's blog began to grow, first a few local shares, then hundreds of parents and children began commenting. She renamed it officially Sunlight after the storm stories by brave kids she wrote about hospital food that tasted like wet cardboard, about learning to walk again with jelly legs, about what to say when someone makes you feel invisible. It was honest, bright, and powerful. One day, a woman from a publishing house emailed me. Your daughter's voice is something the world needs. Would she ever consider writing a book with you? A book. I stared at the message, then at Ava, sitting in her beanbag chair, reading out loud to her stuffed bear. She looked up. Can I have hot cocoa? Only if we make it the special kind, I said, with whipped cream and 2 marshmallows, and a sprinkle of cinnamon, and a sprinkle of cinnamon. We were building a life, not perfect, not easy, but ours. And from that place, from that warmth, I replied to the email, yes, we would love to. Fame is a strange thing. It creeps in quietly at first, an email here, a message there. Then one morning, I opened my inbox to find dozens of interview requests, podcast invitations, a message from a morning show producer asking if we'd fly to New York for a segment called Mothers Who Rise. I showed the email to Ava. Her eyes went wide. They want to talk to us. Only if you want to, I said gently. She blinked, thoughtful. Do I have to wear a dress? I laughed. Absolutely not. We said yes. And 3 weeks later, we stood beneath the glaring lights of a television studio, hand in hand. I had never worn makeup that thick in my life, and Ava kept giggling every time the powder brush tickled her cheek. They asked us about the blog. They asked me about the courtroom. But what surprised me most was the last question the host asked Ava. If you could say one thing to kids out there who are hurting, what would it be? Ava didn't even pause. She looked into the camera and said, You're not broken. You're just not done growing. The studio went silent. I felt something crack open inside my chest. Something like awe. In the months that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. Therapy sessions gave way to dance classes. Doctor visits turned into swimming lessons. We no longer whispered in hospital corridors. We shouted with joy in open fields. I enrolled in a part-time writing program. Ava began volunteering at a children's library on weekends. Every now and then, a letter from my mother would arrive. Each one more measured, less manipulative, but they went unanswered. She had spoken clearly once. That was enough. Daniel emailed once too, one line. Hope you're happy. You ruined us. I stared at it for a long time, then deleted it, because happiness was never the crime, their control was. 1 year after the accident, Ava and I returned to the intersection. The place where it all changed. We brought with us a small bouquet of sunflowers and a single, hand-painted sign Ava had made herself. It read, to everyone who survives, keep going. We planted it in the grass by the sidewalk and stood there, watching the cars pass. Ava slipped her hand into mine. Mom. Yeah, baby. I think we're the lucky ones. I squeezed her fingers. Yeah, I think so too. And in that moment, under a sky that didn't need to apologize, I knew. We weren't just survivors, we were authors of a new beginning. It arrived in a plain envelope, addressed in handwriting I recognized but had not seen in over a year. My mother's. I stared at it on the counter for 2 days, untouched, unopened. Ava noticed it once and asked, Is that from her? I nodded. Are you gonna read it? I don't know, I said truthfully. By the 3rd morning, I decided I needed to see what ghosts sound like when they think no one is listening. Inside was a single page. No, dear. No, love. Just this. I didn't understand what I had done until I saw her face on the news. The world called me a monster. Maybe I was. I won't ask for forgiveness. I know better now, but I wanted you to know, even monsters can feel shame. I hope she never remembers my face, and I hope you forget my voice. Mum, I stood there a long time, holding that final apology shaped like an admission and a surrender. Then I tore it into 4 perfect squares, dropped them into the compost bin, and walked outside where Ava was chalk drawing the word, hope, on the driveway. Time doesn't heal everything, but it makes enough space for something else to grow in the gaps. Laughter. Silence. Rest. Ava grew taller, her scars faded. She could now run across the sand without stumbling. She spoke at her school's assembly about kindness. She published a poem in the city paper about learning to breathe after betrayal. And me, I stopped checking over my shoulder. I stopped apologizing for softness. I started sleeping through the night. I even started dating again. Not because I needed to fill a hole, but because I wanted to share the quiet. His name is Marcus. The first time he met Ava, he brought her a science puzzle and said, "You're the boss today. You make the rules." She grinned and said, "Good. Then you're making snacks." I sat back and watched her lead. My little girl, once gasping for life under tubes and tape, now claiming joy like it was her birthright. Because it was. If I could go back to the woman I was in that hospital room, covered in blood, trembling with fear, I would kneel beside her and say, "You are not overreacting. You are not weak for loving too much, and no, they are not right about you. You are not disposable. You are fire and mercy. You are the quiet voice that chose to roar, and you will rebuild not only yourself, but the tiny human watching you, learning from your every breath, and one day, she will call you her hero. And it will be the only title that ever mattered." One night, while Ava slept and the world was still, I scrolled through the blog she had named Sunlight After the Storm. A comment caught my eye. "I'm 15. My dad says I ruin everything. My mom just watches. But this blog makes me feel like I matter. Thank you." I replied. "You do matter. You always did. Let no one cut you down to make room for someone else. There is enough sky for all of us." Then I turned off the screen, stepped into Ava's room, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "You were always enough. So, if you've stayed with me this far, thank you. Because this wasn't just a story about revenge. It was a story about reclaiming your voice. It was about walking away from people who try to define your worth by how useful you are to them. It was about one mother who chose her daughter over the approval of a family that never truly saw either of them as human. It was about survival. But more than that. It was about choosing peace over legacy, love over obligation, and healing over silence. I used to think blood was thicker than anything. That, family, meant forever, no matter what. But I've learned that love isn't defined by DNA, it's defined by presence, by kindness, by the people who show up when it matters most. I learned that silence is not strength, it's survival, and sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is speak, even if your voice shakes. Even if it costs you everything you thought you needed to keep. Because in losing them I found us. My daughter. And myself. Maybe you've been told you're too emotional. Maybe they said you should get over it. Maybe they made you feel like your pain was inconvenient, or your voice too loud. Maybe they laughed when you were hurting. Maybe they still expect you to smile like it never happened. To you I say, you are not too much. You are not the problem. And you never, ever deserve to be someone else's sacrifice. Your story matters. Your healing matters. And your truth. It's enough. If this story resonated with you, even a little, leave a comment. Not for the algorithm, but because someone out there needs to know they're not alone. Share this video if you believe truth should never be buried beneath guilt and shame. And subscribe to Reddit Revenge Hub, where silence ends and truth finally begins. Thank you for watching. You are more than what they said you were. And your story isn't over. Not yet. Not even close.